Logs, domain, and range. By Lindsay B. For today, we're going to talk about a king. He has a big crown because he's super rich, but he's not very smart. So we're going to give him a sticky tongue, and he's kind of cross-eyed because he's not that smart. Alrighty, well, here's our king. He's going to wear a pretty cloak with lots of fur. He's super fat, so we're just going to make him a fat belly. Give him some fluffy arms. And so this king, who's not very smart, decides he's going to build his castle on a up. He's going to build his castle up, like this. Well, he starts to build and he realizes that if he builds it up really high, it really doesn't have any, it's not very wide, and you can't really, it would be like 2 feet of walking right here, so it'd be very small. And once they'd finally built the castle, it fell over, so it wasn't a good idea. Now the question he asked his noble was, why did it fall over? And this is what you'll need to remember. It's a Y. As long as you're building up or straight down, it's a Y. Alrighty. Then he decided, well, I'm going to build mine wider. And wider was the way to go. He realized that he could make a whole castle if he built wider. And that way it wasn't 2 feet to walk to the end of the building. He had more room to rule his kingdom. And in his kingdom it was called a domain. His domain stretched wide, again, instead of up, because who would want to be in charge of the sky? There's nothing in the sky except birds. And he wanted to be in charge of these nice little people down here. So he made his building down, he made it wide in his domain. Some would say that his castle was extremely cool, so we're just going to put extreme. This is what you're going to need to remember. This is his domain, and it's an extreme place. So he went wide. So anything to do with the line here is considered X, or the domain. Just like the other is considered Y. Anything up and down are going to be Y, because the king couldn't figure out why it didn't work to build a castle that way. Alrighty. You have to remember about Y is that it's also considered the range. Just like the ranges on a note, which go up and down, the same with Y and the range. Alrighty. So next we're going to apply. So I'm going to draw a nice arrow. Okay. Every time someone just says log x minus 2 or something, because they didn't specify what number, it's going to automatically be 10. Alrighty, well, we have a couple basic problems just to show you how to find the domain and range. So we're going to start with this problem. It's log, we know it's a 10 because that's automatic, x minus 1. Alrighty, so we're going to get started by taking this calculator, and usually it'll be off, so you do second on and clear. Then you go to y equals and type in log x minus 1. Now see how it doesn't give you the option for a 10 at that goes right there, like in the problem right here. The reason for that is because in order for it to be shown that this is another thing, you would have to divide the log by that base. It gets a lot more complicated than this, but for the purposes now, we're just going to stick with this, and we know it's automatically a 10. So we're going to go graph, and it should graph out the thing. You can barely see it, but if you can, that's pretty much what it looks like. Now, since it is so zoomed out, we're just gonna go zoom, and we're gonna go zoom in, and it should zoom in. Alrighty, as you can see here, this is what it looks like. Now this calculator, which is a TI-84, is very misleading. This line right here doesn't mean it ends. Just because it stopped right there on the calculator doesn't mean it ends. It actually keeps going. So take that into account. It's going to end up looking like an infinity. So this is basically what we're working with. What we're going to do is we're going to look at domain. And as we know from the king, domain is everything that's wide. So we're going to start by looking at everything from here to here. And we want to see how far the function goes. So for this one, for domain reason, we're going to go to second table, and then we can look it up. This is the x, right? So we've typed in log, and don't forget to put a parentheses around the x, and then add the -1, because if you do a parentheses around both those numbers, then it looks like you're saying just x minus 1, and it's really the log of x minus 1. It has to be the whole thing. Alrighty, so then we press graph, and as you can see, this is going to be what we get. Okay, for this purpose, we're going to move the calculator aside for a second and graph that. This looks like this, and it appears to be going onwards. Okay, so it looks a bit like that. Alrighty, now that we see the graph, we know that x has anything to do with this, because the king couldn't build his castle up. So this is going to be the x-axis, and this is going to be the y-axis, just like in our story with the king. And we're going to start with domain, which, as you remember, domain is the x, because that's where the king built his castle. So here's the domain. What we're going to do is we're going to go back to the calculator, second table, then we're going to go and it's going to show this table with all these numbers. Now what we're going to do is the one before the error is going to be, see 0, see how that's an arrow? It's the error, it's the first error, so that's where the actual number is. So we're going to start with that. So we know that it stops at 0. And then we can put 0 here, right? Then we go down and see that all these numbers are all good, fine, and dandy, as you might say. They all go down and on into infinity. So, and you can see that these are positives. So we're going to put, because this goes down to infinity, we're going to put the infinity sign. And this is the domain of the problem. So there's domain. Now, we have the domain, we need the range, which is going to be y. Alrighty, so as you can see, there are arrows on both of these, so there may not be any limitations, but just to make sure, we're going to look down everything. And since it has arrows in the graph, we knew automatically that it's going to be infinity to infinity. But as you can see, this looks like a replication of the same thing, and we're not talking about just the positives, so we're going to have to put a negative infinity to positive infinity. That way it captures everything. So that is their domain and range of the log 10 x minus 1. Alrighty, so to go on to a more graph it again. Okay, and it starts somewhere down here and just goes onwards. We know with asymptotes that it's going to be 2 arrows throughout the whole thing, so those are our 2 arrows. Now we're going to look at domain, which is again all of this. So here's domain. We're going to label this x and this y, because this is the range because of the crazy king. Alrighty, then we're going to go to the calculator, and we're going to press second calculate, and we can see all the numbers. I'm going to scroll up to the numbers up here. And once it starts going to 0 error, we know that that's about where we need to stop. So for domain, it's going to be at 0. It's going to be 0 to infinity. Alrighty, for this graph, we're going to go log 10, because we know 10 is automatic. It's always going to be 10 unless otherwise stated. And then x minus 4. But this time, the problem specifies that it's going to be in the parentheses. So when you see something that's in the parentheses of a log, you can automatically assume that because it's with the x, that it's going to affect the x or domain. So we're going to look at this problem again. We're going to graph it out. Second, you go to y equals, you type it in, you go to second, you go to graph, and this is what you're going to find. Alrighty, we're going to draw it out. It's not going to be something really fancy, but we're going to draw it out. And it should look something like this. Alrighty, so now that you see this, we can move on. We're going to go to second table and look at all these errors. Alrighty, so now we can see that this 4 is going to be the beginning of the x's. That's where the x stops, because this is x as labeled on this table, that the 4 is where it's going to end. So we're going to start by putting the 4 here, and then we're going to look and see that's dealing with right here. Where does the graph end here? And it ends at 4. Then we're going to look at y. It goes 4 and on to infinity. That's what that arrow means. So that's going to be infinity, and we're just going to call that the domain. And the range is going to be, we're going to look at this, and the range is everything that affects the y's. So all of this. And you can see that nothing through the table that is going to be onwards from negative infinity to positive infinity because of this y. So we're just going to do negative infinity to positive infinity. Alrighty, because this just keeps going due to the arrows. Well, now you know the basic logarithm, domain and range of logarithms, and good luck in the future.